Welcome everyone to our live screen here at Rancho Los Ritos, our virtual gathering for October. I am now going to send it to our YouTube page so that people can view it there live. No, not my account. Oh dear. Sorry, this is my first time being the, it should have my password on here. Jesus. Um, um, it's not recognizing me to sign in. And let me see if I can find my password.
So we're not live right now, right, Laura?
We're not live. Well, I think the volunteers can see us, but we're not recording to YouTube.
I see.
So do you want to get started while I work on that, or should I try to?
No, that's fine. All right, so hopefully everyone can see us. Yes, okay. Ian Beavis has said everyone can see us, so we're in. All right. So welcome everyone. Most of you should know me. My name is Allison Bruzahoff. I am the executive director here at Rancho Los Cerritos. And it's always such a pleasure to be at these events. I know we do some live, we do some virtual. And obviously this is a virtual one, and we're really looking forward to hearing from Bob in a little bit. So thank you for being here, Bob. And just to kind of wanted to let you know about a few things that we have going on, is we do always have some updates. Let's see, on the project management side, we are actually working on phase 3 of looking back to advance forward. I know I have said that for a few years now, but it is happening. Sure, you will have seen all the green fencing in the lower lot that's coming onto the site. So we're very excited that we've got the Conservation Corps for Long Beach is doing the work, and we are removing invasive trees in the lower lot. And then in between the parking spots, that center median, will be creating a green strip that will help, transfer water down to a bioswale that will be at the end of the lower lot. So we're partnering with the Conservation Corps, and Virginia Country Club is on board. And then also on site it'll be you don't have to believe me till you see it, but we're actually going to connect the timeline walk, the main pedestrian path, with the overlook. So that'll be really cool. And then we're also working on a lot of the curriculum projects. Alana and her advisory group is working on the STEAM curriculum for the project. So we're looking at a program that right now is being geared towards the 11th graders. So she is working on that group, and we've got a great advisory group that involves a few teachers, some community members, and also the city of Long Beach. We are also working on putting interactive displays and didactic educational panels across the site. And the other educational component of that project is we are connecting the Rancho to the LA River. So we put together a pedestrian and bike path that people will be able to click on at the Rancho, basically a QR code, or you can download a map from the website that'll tell you how to get from the Rancho to the Dominguez Gap, which is the closest area of the LA River to us. So that is really cool. So we're working on all that, and we are very excited about that. Then also so that's looking back to advance forward. So we finished phases 1 and 2. We're now on phase 3, which is great. And Ian, it is about a 1.8-mile walk, a little bit farther, a little bit quicker to get to. if you're on a bike, but it really goes through the neighborhood. So you go down San Antonio by the park there, and then you turn onto the area that goes to Dominguez Gap. So we're super excited about that. And just another way to get people to explore the area around us. So that is looking back to advance forward. Another one that we've been talking about is the fire protection project. So that's been in the works for a year, not quite two, but a little over a year. And today we had a walkthrough with the team. And just for context, what we're doing is obviously we're a 180-year-old house. And then we also have the visitor center, we have our exhibits, and then the cottage, which is the administrative buildings. Well, we're very well protected with security, cameras, and so forth. We do not have fire detection or suppression in those buildings. So this project is to fix that. So we had a walkthrough today with Nick Artem, who is a very specialized consultant, who his whole purpose and his business is to put in detection and suppression systems in historical sites and museums literally across the world. You name a country, I can probably name a project that he has done work in. So he's been our expert on this. And the reason we brought in an expert was, in the cottage and the visitor center, we can have, sprinkler systems. But when you're going into the 180-year-old adobe, you don't want to see the system. You don't want to see sprinklers hanging down or pipes hanging down. We also don't want water in the historic house. So we're putting in a fine mist system that will, while it's not water, biometric, so it can sense, whether it's just an alert or whether there's a literal fire, and it will dispel mist that will take out all of the danger. And it has been proven, it's at the National Archives in Washington, D.C., that this mist system won't even hurt. You won't even be able to find it on books. So everything will be dry. So we're literally protecting all of our assets in the historic house. So it's a relatively complex system. And today we had a walkthrough with Nick, the consultant, the construction company who's been doing these, as well as a guy who does who's going to be doing the Adobe patchwork. So when we build these conduits, you won't be able to see them. So that walkthrough happened today. So we'll be working on that. And speaking of Adobe painting, for those that have been to the Rancho lately, the Adobe looks a little bit like a modern piece of art. It's the white Adobe with all of the Adobe wall repairs in brown. That is not permanent. We are working on getting bids so we can make the Adobe house look full again. So that is also in the works as well. So there's been a lot of those projects that are kind of behind the scenes that we really, we talk about, but not all the time. So those are all underway. And I will say, and I think Renee will touch on this a tad, is we did have a very successful 2024 Adobe Sunset Gala. It was a beautiful evening. We exceeded our fundraising goals. We kept our expenses down. People had an absolutely lovely time. We had 3 amazing honorees, and those honorees were the Bixbys. So Jean, Barbara, and Steve were there, their family descendants. They were also representing Steve's older brother, Paul, who had just passed away. We had Leadership Long Beach, and then also Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, who was one of our big funders for the Looking Back to Advance Forward project. So the gala was super successful. I'm very excited about that. And thank you to everyone who's on this that went through the DEIA volunteer workshops this past summer. So we're all invested in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So thank you everyone for being committed to that. And then of course, a gigantic thank you to all of you and those that couldn't be here tonight and will hopefully watch this on YouTube. We couldn't do all of this without our volunteers. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. So that is my welcome. I'm excited to hear what Bob has to say a little bit later on. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Renee, who is our development director. Renee.
Thank you, Allison. And just to echo Allison's thanks, we appreciate you so very much. Obviously, the time that you put in and the heart that you put in is irreplaceable and invaluable. And we thank you, thank you, thank you. For those who also make donations as far as revenue, we did have a very successful gala. Thank you for all of you who supported that. Even if it was just kind of telling a friend about it or letting people know that it was happening and going on, we exceeded every goal and then some, and couldn't do that without our population of friends and volunteers. So thank you so much. Additionally, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I'm sure you're seeing around you at the Rancho. So our giving tree has been in place since July, and we debuted that at the recent exhibition. It's in front of the visitor center, directly in front of the museum shop on the movable wall. And if you've noticed, it was covered in hearts for a very long time. Each of those hearts represented a different donation, and it ended up raising $1,010. So thank you to all of you who bought a heart or who told people about the hearts. Super successful and just a really nice way to engage every audience, because the lowest price heart was only $5. So it was really something that everyone could participate in. We've moved the theme now to, it's still the giving tree, but now instead of hearts, you'll see leaves. So the tree isn't quite as full right now with the leaves because that just launched 2 weeks ago. But just so that you know, it's there. And a new opportunity for all of us. I have not yet bought my leaf. I did buy a few hearts, but I will be there to buy a leaf, if not this week, next week. And I encourage you all to do the same, and certainly talk about the opportunity to all of our visitors. Because again, just a great way to get involved in the Rancho, and surprising to see there've been a couple of times I've been out there and people who are visiting for the first time really love the idea and were able to even purchase hearts. So it's not even just for those of us who've been around a little while. So loving the efforts there. And of course, y'all know about our membership program that's still in place. It was redeveloped this year. And as volunteers, you get a half price membership, either as individuals or as our dual membership as well. So half off of that. And with that, of course, comes a 15% discount at the museum shop. So another incentive to shop. So please take a look at that and talk to anybody who seems interested at all about the program, because it does support all of the wonderful things, as do all of the donations, but all of the wonderful things that Allison covered. We want to make sure our rancho is always in tip-top shape and providing wonderful programming. And of course, we can't do that without financial support. So please, please keep talking about all the things we do. That leads me to Long Beach Gives. I know that was a little bit ago, but it kind of came and went with a gala between it. So we did do really well. We exceeded our goal. We raised more than we did last year. We were over $11,000. So again, thank you for those of you who were able to make donations. And if you weren't, I'm excited to tell you that you have an upcoming opportunity to do so, because like the rest of the world, Rancho Los Cerritos will be proudly participating in Giving Tuesday, which this year is on December 3rd. It's always the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So sometimes it's November, sometimes it's December. This year's date is December 3rd, and I promise you, you will be hearing a whole lot more from us about that. So please think of us that day. And again, just a million thank yous for everything that you all do. And I will now turn it over to my colleague, Alfred Alonso, our fantastic Director of Operations.
Oh, thanks, Renee. I can't wait to buy my leaf on the Giving Tree. So hi, all. I'm Alfred Alonso, Director of Operations. Despite my name tag, I'm not Renee Salvador, as you guys have just heard from. So going in, Allison covered a bunch of the projects we're working on as far as looking back to advance forward, fire suppression as well. We have a lot of stuff going on at the end of this year and moving into next year. with some of these wonderful projects that we've been working on for so long, capital projects and deferred maintenance. Speaking of maintenance, one of the reasons that I'm here tonight is to introduce our new maintenance and facility manager, Ruben Rodriguez, who's been with us now for the past about 3 months. He's taking care of the day-to-day sort of facility operations, and she's been a great asset to the site thus far. And I'm glad to introduce him to you guys right now.
Can anybody hear me? Am I good? Am I clear?
You're good to go.
Okay, how's it going, everybody? Like how Alfred said, my name's Ruben Rodriguez. I've been here with the Rancho team for the last few months, and I'm very excited to be here and be part of the new projects coming up. Like how Allison mentioned, phase 3 just started off, and I'm just pumped up. I'm pumped up what we could do with the ranch and see the updates and everything and how the ranch just starts to grow more. So I'm very excited, and it's very nice to meet everybody here.
Thanks, Ruben. We're super happy to have you. I'm going to turn it back over to Allison now.
Yes, so thank you, Alfred, and thank you, Ruben and Renee as well. Another thing I wanted to talk to this group about, just so you know what's happening, is I think you'll be seeing a lot more. If there's not enough action on site, you'll be seeing much more of it. Because for those that don't remember, we were extremely fortunate, both ranchos, our Rancho Los Cerritos and then Rancho Los Alamitos, is we received funding from the state of California. So we received $250,000 from Assemblymember Lowenthal's office, and then we received 1.75 from Senator Gonzalez's office. So we have been working on a whole slate of projects to use those funds. We do have a pretty immediate timeline to be able to use those funds. So we have spent the $250,000. It was a very easy amount of money to spend in a quick, short time. I never do that personally, but okay. But we were able to spend it on part of the rancho, and we spent some of it on the fire protection project. Some of it went to putting a new maintenance shed in the lower lot. Some of it went to deferred tree trimming. Some of it will be going to deferred mulch in the gardens. So we're able to spend quite a bit of money on those projects. Other things that we're looking to spend money on is we will have a bit of a funding gap for phase 3 of looking back to advance forward. So we're going to use some of the funds for that. We are also going to be finally doing a long-term project that's been on the books, which is slightly reconfiguring the lower level of the visitor center so we can put back in a permanent exhibit about the rancho's history. So that's a project we've been working on. We're also working on quite a bit of deferred maintenance on the rancho, in addition to painting, redoing some of the floors in the different rooms. What else have we got on there, Alfred? I know there's quite a bit.
If that's not enough, we're doing barn feasibility. We've met with Studio 111 and gone over some barn designs. It's busy at the rancho.
So working on a lot of those projects, and I'm probably not wandering around the site as much as I could be, but I am trying more to be out there. So if you see me and you want to know what is going on at these different buildings, just let us know. There's quite a bit going on. And also, I'm sure you guys have seen that our school tours are back. So Adelante, People of the Rancho is back. We're doing tons of school tours. Very excited about that. Also developing our STEAM curriculum. So it's an active site. We've got a lot going on. And if you guys haven't seen the 2 rooms that we just opened, the tenant room is now open. We're working on the interpretation guidelines for docents and volunteers, and also the 2-story living room that we have furnished. So it represents the life in the 1930s. And the set of rooms that we're now working on is up in the sleeping porch. So that has been masked off with blue tape about where furniture is going to go, but it will represent a 1930s sleeping porch. So quite a bit going on, always exciting. And okay, I think, I don't know, Alfred, or Renee, or Alfred and Renee. Is there anything else you guys want to share? If not, I'm gonna turn it back to Laura.
Hello, everyone. Um, so it's not letting us send it live to YouTube. We've been going through, oh, wait, here, this might be it. Check activity, yes, it was me. Okay, wait, I think we can get it.
All right, drum roll, Laura, it's a drum roll.
Oh, oh, please. Oh, now the page doesn't come up. Oh, wait, yes. Okay, I did.
Zoom anxiety, it happens even in 2024. We've been doing this for a few years, but it still exists, and Zoom every so often loves to thwart even our most expert of users.
It says the user is not enabled for Zoom.
I don't think we need to share everything, but you're right. Technology is wonderful, except when it's not. So that is very true. So it's happened to all of us at all times.
I don't think it's gonna let me do it. We are recording it and we should be able to post it later to our YouTube. So I think that's what we're gonna have to go with.
And I think you're right, Laura. I think you have done the absolute best that you can do. I know you've been
I've
working on it
I've tried logging in as me, as Jan, and it did finally let me in as Jan, but then it said there's some other authentication it didn't have. So I'm gonna
You've tried.
I tried really hard, but so we want to get on to our wonderful presentation from Bob Blythe. There's a fun story how it is how this came about. I don't know why it's not going to me instead of you, Allison. Maybe if you mute yourself. He was brought to the rancho and had a tour probably over a decade ago, and was then speaking with the docents about what a wonderful place this was. And he let them know what his past was in historical preservation, and it was all set up that he was going to do a live presentation for our volunteers. And then there was a death in his family, so that didn't happen. And so recently he was visiting again, and it was brought to my attention that this wonderful presentation about how Bob, who worked for the National Park Service, getting national history sites recognized, which ours is. We're very proud of that. And he's going to talk about how that happened and what's the difference between that and the National Historic Register. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob now for this long-awaited presentation on historical preservation.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura. I'm pleased to be finally delivering on my promise to give a talk about the history of historic preservation. So I'm going to share screen here. And get into my PowerPoint. Okay. Very good. So yeah, I got to talking to some of the Rancho docents about, well, what's the difference between National Historic Landmark status, National Register listing, etc. So that's what I'm going to try to talk about, how all of this came about. So as you probably know, there are basically three designations that exist in the US for historic properties. A property can be listed on the National Register of Historic Places with significance either at the national level, significance at the state level, or significance at the local level. And then there's the National Historic Landmark Program, which is completely separate from the National Register, and it's only properties of outstanding national importance that can become National Historic Landmarks. And finally, the third category of recognition is being designated as a local landmark. And as I'm sure you know, the Rancho has the distinction of having all three of these designations. So how did all of this come about? Well, concern for the preservation of historic properties developed rather slowly in the United States. By the middle of the 19th century, as the country expanded and matured, there began to be an interest in preserving elements of the nation's past. And at first, much of this interest centered on preserving historic documents or physical objects, an interest in collecting colonial period furniture. A pioneering effort to preserve a historic property involved George Washington's home, Mount Vernon, on the banks of the Potomac in Virginia. By the 1850s, Mount Vernon had become rather run down, and there was a developer who was trying to buy the property and turn it into a hotel. And when they were approached about saving Mount Vernon, neither the state of Virginia nor the federal government showed any interest in becoming involved. An energetic South Carolina woman, Anne Pamela Cunningham, stepped up to the plate and formed a private national organization, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And this association, led by women, was able to raise $200,000 to purchase the Mount Vernon property and turn it into a house museum. 170 years on, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association continues its very successful stewardship of the property. Now, the Mount Vernon effort set a precedent, and a number of other properties, places like Andrew Jackson's home, the Hermitage in Tennessee, were saved by similar privately funded efforts in the 19th century. And these early preservation efforts had a number of things in common. The properties that were saved were almost always associated with important political or military figures. In effect, these were something like patriotic shrines. And another factor, the role of women was crucial. Almost all of these early preservation efforts, like the Mount Vernon effort, were carried on by women. And these were all private initiatives. Typically, there was no participation of government. So this was what's going on starting in the 1850s. Individual homes connected with famous people were beginning to be preserved. Then later, around 1900, some sites began to be preserved for their architectural importance rather than for their association with famous men. And one of these first such efforts was the effort to preserve the Whipple House, which you see here in Ipswich, Massachusetts. Dating to the late 17th century, the Whipple House was opened to the public as a house museum in 1899. And no famous white man lived in this house, but it was a notable example of 17th century frame construction. So up until 1900, basically you've got private efforts to preserve historic properties. And the federal government became involved in preservation on a piecemeal basis. At first, there was no real coordinated effort. The first step came in 1892. By an act of Congress, the Casa Grande ruins in Arizona, constructed by the Sonoran Desert people circa 1350, became a protected national reserve. And a bit later, Congress began setting aside some Civil War battlefields created as national military parks. The Chickamauga battlefield in Georgia was the first Civil War battlefield that was protected, set aside in 1890, as you see here. A bit later, Gettysburg, Shiloh, and some other of the Civil War fields were made national military parks. And in these early years, these battlefield parks were administered by the War Department. Another spur to federal involvement in historic preservation was the widespread looting and vandalism that was taking place at prehistoric Native American sites in the American Southwest. This led to the passage in 1906 of something called the Antiquities Act. Now, the Antiquities Act established penalties for looting or vandalism at historic and prehistoric properties in federal ownership. It only covered properties that the federal government owned. Another important aspect of the law, the act gave the president the authority to create national monuments on federal land. And the language of the act was quite broad. The law gave the president power, acting on his own, to confer monument status on, quote, historic landmarks, historic and prehistoric structures, and other objects of historic or scientific interest, close quote. So much of the land in the American West belonged to the federal government. So the Antiquities Act just gave the president the authority to carve out portions of that federal land that contained historic or prehistoric sites and declare them national monuments. And that's the important distinction between a national park and a national monument. Only Congress can create a national park, but the president alone can create a national monument. And many of you know, I'm sure, the first national park was Yellowstone, established by Congress in 1872. But getting Congress to create a national park is typically a long, drawn-out process, and it only takes the stroke of the presidential pen to create a national monument. Theodore Roosevelt was president when the Antiquities Act was passed, and he made very good use of it before he left office in 1909. Teddy Roosevelt created 18 national monuments, and 6 of these were prehistoric sites in the American Southwest, notably Chaco Canyon, a site that was occupied from the 800s to the 1100s. It's now known as Chaco Culture National Historic Park. Interestingly, Roosevelt also made the Grand Canyon a national monument. And the Grand Canyon remained a national monument for about 10 years, and Congress elevated it to national park status in 1919. Then, 10 years after the passage of the Antiquities Act, Congress in 1916 established the National Park Service. The 1916 law brought the existing national parks, national monuments, and national reserves under the unified management of a single agency. And at this time, the majority of the parks and monuments were natural areas, but a few of them were historic and prehistoric sites. And interestingly, the act creating the National Park Service did direct the service to protect historic objects in the parks and monuments. But even after the creation of the National Park Service in 1916, most historic preservation efforts in the United States, they were still mostly private ventures. Now, one private effort that gave a big boost to historic preservation in the United States was the establishment of Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. This effort began in 1926, and it was funded largely by John D. Rockefeller Jr. With the oil millions that he inherited from his father. This was the first effort in the United States to preserve not just a single building, but to preserve an entire community. And again, this was all privately funded. There was no government involvement. Here, one of the buildings that was reconstructed, the Capitol building, a 1705 building reconstructed as part of Colonial Williamsburg. Now, not long after the effort to preserve Colonial Williamsburg got underway, another southern city took steps to preserve its history. The first city to establish a local protected historic district was Charleston, South Carolina. Charleston had survived the Civil War largely without damage, and many colonial period and federal era houses remained in the city in the early 20th century. But by the 1920s, as automobile ownership became more widespread, the historic areas in Charleston were threatened. There was a growing demand for filling stations, parking lots, and wider streets to accommodate the automobile traffic. So wanting to save portions of its heritage, the city conducted a survey of historic buildings. And then in 1931, Charleston approved the Old and Historic Charleston District. And one thing to keep in mind about these mid-20th century preservation efforts, it was pretty much only the homes of the elite white community that were considered worthy of preservation. It took some decades before the preservation movement broadened out to preserve other types of resources. So with a local historic district, once one is established, any new construction or modifications to buildings in the district have to be approved by a board of architectural review. Many other local historic districts were created following the lead of Charleston, and they all pretty much work in the same way. There's a board of architectural review or design review. If your home is in the historic district and you want to alter the exterior, you have to get a certificate of appropriateness. And as I'm sure you know, the city of Long Beach has 18 recognized historic districts and more than 100 designated landmark structures. And the Rancho was designated a local landmark in 1979. So you've got all this private and a little bit of government preservation activity that's going forward in the early 20th century. By the time of the Great Depression, there is some movement to preserve our past. And then, of course, President Franklin Roosevelt's response to the Great Depression was the New Deal. And the New Deal programs brought about a substantial expansion of the role of the federal government in historic preservation. Leaders in the National Park Service wanted the service to be more involved in protecting historic sites. So in 1933, at the beginning of Franklin Roosevelt's administration, the Park Service convinced the president to transfer the Civil War battlefields and the historic forts that had been under War Department administration. They were all moved over to the National Park Service. In addition, Congress established several historic sites in the eastern U.S. and put them under Park Service stewardship. And one of these was Colonial National Historical Park in Virginia, which consists of the site of the Jamestown settlement and the Yorktown battlefield, which I show you here. Yorktown, where General Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington. Then, to more firmly establish historic preservation as a national goal, the Park Service secured the passage of the Historic Sites Act of 1935. And the Historic Sites Act stated, quote, "It is national policy to preserve for public use historic sites, buildings, and objects of national significance for the inspiration and benefit of the people of the United States." So this Historic Sites Act in 1935, it directed the National Park Service to do several things. It told the service to conduct surveys of historic sites, also to secure and preserve plans, drawings, and photographs of historic sites, buildings, and objects. Furthermore, to preserve sites by acquiring, restoring, and maintaining them. And finally, to interpret the country's heritage through historic markers and other educational means. Now, this mandate in the 1935 Act to collect plans, drawings, and photographs actually gave official approval to a program that had already been started as an emergency measure in 1933. And that was something called the Historic American Buildings Survey. The Historic American Buildings Survey, the acronym for that is HABS, H-A-B-S. It gave employment to out-of-work architects, and it also created a permanent record of historic sites, many of which were endangered. And I was really delighted to discover that in 1934, a HABS team came out to the Rancho and did measured drawings and took photographs of Rancho, here, Casa de los Cerritos. And these drawings and photographs done, 90 years ago, are housed at the Library of Congress. So these teams went out across the country and they made measured drawings like these, the elevations of the Rancho, some details of walls, windows, and doors, and some interior details. So these teams went out and they documented hundreds of historic structures, including the Rancho. Now, one of the major goals of this 1935 Historic Sites Act was to identify sites of outstanding national importance with the hope that Congress could be persuaded to add them as units of the national park system. And this was in line with the interest among National Park Service managers to increase the number of historic sites it managed. The survey was started in the 1930s. Then when the United States entered World War II, this survey of nationally important sites was was suspended. And really, during the war, the Second World War and the early post-war years, the Park Service was pretty much a bare bones operation. Then, of course, after the war, the country enters a great economic boom. And this spurt of growth had some devastating effects on historic properties. Spurred on by federal government policies like mortgage guarantees and the building of the interstate highway system, there was a mass movement. Millions of people began moving to the suburbs. Many historic urban areas were in decline, and policies of urban renewal led to widespread demolition. Here, an example of that going on in Boston. And the federal government was rather slow to respond to these new developments after the war. The Park Service finally resumed its survey of nationally important sites in 1957. By 1957, it was clear there was this backlog of nationally important sites that had been surveyed, but it was pretty clear most of these were in private hands. It was pretty clear that Congress was not going to buy these historic sites and give them to the National Park Service. So in 1960, the Park Service came up with a new program to recognize nationally important historic sites. And this was the National Historic Landmark Program, launched in 1960. And the purpose of the National Historic Landmark Program was to recognize sites of outstanding significance to the nation as a whole. The idea was that these properties would be really the creme de la creme, the most important nationally significant sites. For example, if a number of sites are associated with an important American individual, usually only the one associated with that individual's productive career merits designation as a National Historic Landmark. So as I said, the National Historic Landmark Program was launched in 1960. The first list of 80 National Historic Landmarks was announced then. Now there are 2,800 National Historic Landmarks. So it's really a pretty select list and puts the Rancho in pretty distinguished company. And the Rancho was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1970. So that the National Historic Landmark Program was really seen as a way to encourage private owners of nationally important properties to actively protect them. And under the NHL program, each newly designated landmark is entitled to receive a bronze plaque like this one. But the landmark program only dealt with nationally important properties. And throughout the 1950s and 1960s, many important historic sites, important at the state or the local level, continued to be destroyed or threatened. The announcement in 1962 that Pennsylvania Station in New York City would be demolished and the site redeveloped aroused considerable concern. Pennsylvania Station was a masterwork of the New York architectural firm of McKim, Mead & White. It opened in 1910. So there was a movement, architects and others picketed and mounted a campaign to try to save Penn Station, but the city of New York approved its demolition. So the loss of Penn Station was an important spur to the passage of the Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Here, President LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, signing the Historic Preservation Act into law. Now, the Historic Preservation Act created a system of federal and state cooperation to identify and preserve historic sites of varying levels of significance. It was the 1966 Act that established the National Register of Historic Places. And so the National Register became the official listing of properties with significance not only at the national level, but properties significant at the state or local level as well. The Act also provided federal grants to establish state historic preservation offices, one in each state. The State Historic Preservation Office conducts surveys of historic resources, provides preservation assistance to localities, and it's actually the state offices that process nominations to place sites on the National Register. Finally, Section 106 of the Act requires that any undertaking that receives federal funding or requires federal government approval must take into account the effects of that undertaking on historic resources. So, for example, if a highway that gets federal money is planned, the effects of that highway on historic resources has to be evaluated and, if necessary, mitigated. And this mitigation might involve rerouting of portions of the highway to avoid the historic resources, or as a last resort, the law would require documenting the historic resources that have to be demolished. So the National Register of Historic Places currently has 95,000 listings. Some of those are individual buildings that are listed. Many of them are districts that include numbers of buildings. So the total number of buildings, sites, and objects that are on the register, when you include the ones that are within districts, that's totals 1.5 million structures. So clearly the National Historic Landmark List is much more restricted. We're talking 2,800 NHLs versus 1.5 million properties on the National Register. So that's a brief history of the historic preservation movement in the United States. And I'll just close by saying the Rancho, documented by the Historic American Buildings Survey in 1934. It was designated an NHL and also placed on the National Register in 1970. And in 1979, it was made a Long Beach Historic Landmark. So a pretty special place that you have there.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was great.
Well, I was happy to do it. I hope it was enjoyable.
I think it was. We didn't lose a single person from watching, and we had a lot more than I would have guessed.
Excellent.
If you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yes, I need to do that, don't I?
Yes, I'm getting comments. It was very helpful and illumination and a lot of applause. There was one question, but then you immediately went on and answered their question. So then they removed it.
Okay. Okay. Stop share. Okay, I finally found it.
Very good. Thank you so much, Bob. This will be great. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it live, but it will be posted to our YouTube channel, so people will be able to watch it. Yeah, a lot of people will want to see it.
I had one question there. What is the future of the program?
Oh,
The National Historic Landmark Program continues to operate. Every year, a few properties are added. The National Park Service has a team of historians and architects who review properties that an owner might want to have it made an NHL, and it goes through a process of evaluation.
wonderful. Wonderful to know that it is going strong. So thank you again. And what we usually do now is we promote the volunteers so that they can join the webinar, and we can chit chat and share whatever we want to share. You are free to go. You don't need to stay for this, but if you want to, you're certainly welcome to. So I'm going to start promoting people, and then you'll be able to see yourselves and see each other. So just hold on for a minute and we'll see how that goes. Not every time everybody is able to be promoted, but we will try it. And then okay. Some people are declining. I'm going to go through real quick and see if anybody wants to be promoted. Okay. Review. Okay, I think the rest of the people are deciding not to be promoted, so it's just the three of us. Hi, Penny. I think we can sign off for the night unless you had something you wanted to share today, Penny. It doesn't look like it. Well, that's probably good because since
There,
we're
I just
recording,
was wondering, sorry, if the Rancho Los Alamitos had a similar thing to brag about.
they are not a national
They are not.
Yeah, they
Ooh.
are a local historic site, but they are
Oh.
national like we are. So
All right.
we have bragging rights there.
There we go. That's very nice.
It is very nice.
Mhm. Bring that up.
Okay, well, since we are recording, we're not sending it live. There is actually a limited amount of space on it. So it's going to be good if I end this right now. So thank you all for coming, and I hope everyone has a happy Halloween, and I hope to see you around the Rancho soon. And thank you again, Bob. I know I won't see you around the Rancho soon because where are you?
I'm in Chicago.
He's in Chicago, same place where my son is. All right.
Great. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.